Well, Jim,
They did it.
we're back.
The
Who
Dodgers
did
are
it?
going to the World Series.
Oh, yeah.
You're welcome,
I
all you
forgot
Dodger
about that.
fans. Yeah. Oh, you didn't. That wasn't top of your mind.
I noticed that happened.
I showed great
Uh,
restraint by not wearing a Cubs hat tonight.
I appreciate that
Yeah.
about you.
So go Dodgers. I can
That's how
say
you
that.
know the work of God is happening in Jim's life.
Well, let's
Is
not
when-
get too carried away. I'm still an antagonist, but I have friends that are Dodgers fans, and I would
Yeah,
love to see them finally be happy.
rejoice with those who rejoice,
Right.
and you mourn with those who mourn.
Yeah.
And except when they mourn, you don't mourn with them; you rejoice.
Oh yeah, I'm
You're
not
just
saying
rejoicing all the time.
Not at all have I said. I'm not saying I'm a good friend. I'm just
Okay.
saying I have friends.
Yeah.
So that's
Anyway,
all.
well,
Yeah.
hopefully that
Anyway,
will change.
Change
In
Workshop.
Change
Yep. There's hope
Workshop
for
Session
everyone.
5, which
Hope
is
for
where we are.
everyone.
So a couple reminders, which hopefully you know this, but all the content and also a handout from tonight is at missionventura.com/change workshop. Got that handout for you. It's not something we're going to like specifically cover during the session, but if you want to grab that, you want to print it out, it'd be helpful to have maybe even right after the session.
Yeah, he'll reference it
or
real
at some
quick,
point.
But
Yeah, so that is on session 5. A couple other things, if you want to throw this in now in the chat, we got this interest in change groups form that you can fill out. We started talking about that for the first time last week. And so we're going to be launching these change groups, which is kind of a really natural next step for really taking all the stuff we're learning in this and then putting it into practice. We talked a million times now. Michael said we can't do this alone, and that's totally true. And the change group is that experience, like not doing it alone.
Yep.
You're working through the process.
he even says it again tonight, and he said it over
Yeah.
and over. Support and accountability.
That's
support. And
the whole
accountability.
thing.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the rest of our lives. But change group is a great way to start that, and especially if you don't have the people in your life right now, which I think we've talked about a little bit even. Change group's a great way to do that. So fill out that form. You're not signing up for one yet. You're just letting us know we're interested, so we know kind of what we're looking to put together when we launch them. A little bit of bonus material this week too. 2 pieces of bonus content. Very exciting. First of all, there's a great 11 minutes doing another deep dive on anxiety. We've talked about it like in 2 different spots, but it's such an interesting and common concept. Interesting is a bad word for anxiety, but the way Michael talks about it is different than I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And I got a lot of people in my life that struggle with anxiety. I have a lot of anxious moments. And it's really helpful. It's challenging, but he goes through a couple things. He talks about the place for medication. It talks about the energy that we derive from things like anxiety, outrage. Like it's really interesting stuff. So there's about 10 minutes on an extra video on there. We couldn't fit into the session. But then also Michael and I sat down for a Q&A session, over an hour of stuff. We got it all broken up into timestamps for you, so you can look at the specific questions. We had a great old time.
So jealous
talking.
I missed that, man. Because I had a list of questions about you that I wanted to ask him, and I'm bummed I didn't get to do that.
I think that would be really
Next time.
fun.
Change
He
Workshop
did some of
2.0.
that for you, honestly.
Oh,
He
good.
would just
Okay.
go like, well, about you. Not actually that much. I expected more. I was like on my game, ready to defend, and then he was kind. But that's a really cool conversation. So make sure to find a time for that this week. But anything else you want to tell the people?
Are we gonna talk about what's in store after this coming week?
Oh,
I'm looking at you,
yes.
Rebecca
I didn't put it
G.
in my notes.
Rebecca G, I'm looking at you.
Surprise! There's a session 7 to the.
Yeah, we're not done next week, guys. Turns
We're
out we
not done.
couldn't fit him in to 6 weeks.
We tried really hard. This
Yeah.
is also a side effect of starting something before you've finished
That's true.
producing the
That's
content.
true. We actually hadn't recorded anything when we decided.
We were
on
like,
6 weeks.
most likely this is 6.
Yep.
And when Michael started to, honestly, we were filming this, he was like, I got about this much content and you're asking me to put it into this much space. And we were like, yeah, sorry. And then he was like, nah, I got this much. And so we ended up throwing it at 7. I think it's going to be really helpful. Next week, we're talking about codependency and hope. I know it's a strange combination to put together, but it's super helpful, really interesting stuff. And then we're going to finish off with grieving and forgiveness, which doesn't sound like it would be in here,
It's an
but
interesting combination.
it really is.
Yeah, those
but
two
it's
would go together.
unbelievably helpful. Some of the most interesting stuff, super impactful week. There are more tears. It's a great session. So anyway, week 7, it's going to happen. It's going to be great. We won't tell you any more about that. Just keep showing up. So that'll be good. Besides that, we are ready to go. We've laid our foundation over these first 4 sessions for what it looks like to change, sort of the general operating principles for not just Genesis, but like what it means for human beings to change in a real and lasting way. And this is kind of where we start to shift our focus, not just to how we get free, but what happens once we start free. How do we stay that way? What is going to come at us and try and take us away from that freedom and live back as we were? What's going to help us actually keep growing instead of plateauing, and most importantly, then what's again going to stand in our way. So here we go, session 5, spiritual stagnation. Check it out.
In this session, we're going to look at things that can hinder us from your ability, not just willingness, but your ability to live out of your true self. And that's our goal. That's what recovery is. That none of us, I don't think, are living out of our true self. We're living out of a self that to some degree or another has been, distorted. And living out of our true self is the goal of life, because then we're going to be in this place where we really don't need self-destructive behaviors and emotions. Okay? So let's look at the first one. Okay? The spiritual stagnation. Let me tell you a little bit how I came to this. I was doing private practice, had quite a few clients, and they would have, breakthroughs, in our prayer work, like we just did with Taylor and all that. But then they would, go out to try and implement it in their life, and they come back the next week and they haven't done anything. So I realized that most of these people didn't really have anybody to keep them accountability, to keep them accountable and support them in moving towards these wounds that had hindered them in the past. So what I did with the clients, I started creating a group. An amazing thing happened, right? Is the changes that they've been trying to make all these years, and some of them have been in therapy for years and years and years, and really hadn't made any real, had insights, but no real change in what they went to therapy for. That when they had the support and accountability of others, they were able to make these changes. And the light started going on for so many of these people. And so that group was real successful. So I said, I think I need to write a book for church people. But I need to do a bunch of groups with church people to see, I work with addicts and prisoners and prostitutes, and, I knew what their issues were. And so I wanted to create a bridge for them into the church. So I did like 5 groups of women and 2 groups of men, and trying to figure out, how to write what came out to be, the change group books, for the church. Okay? The first thing that amazed me is when I was working with these church people, a lot of them were pastors' wives and all that, is that how could people who look so good be so messed up, right? I mean, my people, were messed up, but they looked messed up, you see? But these people, these church people, had found a way to cope with some of the same emotions and problems and behaviors that my addicts, had struggled with, but they'd found a way to, have a family and go through life. Although inside, they were dying. And so one of the things that we did in these groups is we tried to identify each person's area of natural and spiritual giftedness, right? And get them to get out and start to try and apply it and explore it and use it. And something amazing happened, that when they did that, that their coping behaviors, and especially chemicals, so many of them were on, the Prozac generation, antidepressants, and, and they had eating disorders and sexual disorders and all sorts of, those things began to fade away. So what I found is they were spiritually stagnant, okay? That they had these spiritual gifts, but they never, been able to identify them and use them. And so the next thing, one thing we know about God is God's not into stagnation. You look at the universe and, something dies, it just gets transformed into something else. Nothing is ever actually stagnant. Okay? And I think God is a lot like our earthly father. You know, what brings joy to our hearts mostly is when we see our children begin to discover their talents and their God, their giftings, and begin to explore them, whether it's music or dance or sports or rocket scientists. God gives each of us a unique contribution into the kingdom, right? And of course, it's the enemy's job to keep us from being able to, express that. And so I think God's the same way. He gives us giftings, and I think he gets excited and participates when we begin to explore them and to find out who we really are. See? And it's funny, you have a family with 5 people, and 5 kids, and they're all totally different. How does that happen? Each of them has different talents and interests and personalities, and some of them are introverts, some of them are extroverts, and some of them are afraid to climb the tree, and the other one has to go to the very top branch. Some people are afraid to go on the roof, and other ones have to go on the roof and jump off just to see what it's like. You see, and they all come from the same genetics. You see, and I think that's part of our soul. So let's go on with this, okay? Okay. There's a principle of life, okay, that we see that permeates so many different areas. In the first part of life, you grow by receiving, right? You go to school, you don't have to work, and the whole society just pours into you, okay? But the second part of life, you don't grow anymore by receiving. Now you get married, you pay taxes, and contribute to the next generation. And if you don't do that, you don't grow. We've seen people that, kind of get stuck there. They're in their 40s and all, and they're still, into receiving. Okay? And also in Christianity, same way. In the first part of Christianity, people disciple you, they teach you the Bible, and they try to help you discover, your place in the kingdom, your place in ministry. And then after that happens, you go out and you be a missionary, or you contribute, the giftings that you have, and if you don't do that, you don't grow. Okay? And the Bible is full of this. Okay, let me do this first. Okay, recovery is the same way. You go to 12-step, and you get a sponsor, and a sponsor takes you through the steps and invest in you, and the whole community invest in you. But the 12th step is what? That you go out and give to others what God has done for you, and that's what keeps you sober. So this is a principle of life. In other words, you have to give to grow, and if you don't give, you don't grow. I mean, how many people have you heard in church that say, well, I'm not going to that church anymore because I'm just not getting fed, right? Mm-hmm. And they're dissatisfied, not because they're not getting fed, it's because they're spiritually constipated, You can't keep taking it in without giving it out, you see. It's going to be painful. Okay? And, and we all have things that God has given us to contribute into the kingdom. Okay? So, good.
Yeah, so on the stagnation and the giving to grow, like it's so like obvious in people's lives, because we all know people, or I've been in places where I've got to a point where I know a lot about the Bible, or I know a lot about God,
right,
but I'm stagnant and not growing because I'm not applying what I know or obeying what I know.
Right.
So I watch my friends and I've watched my life be like, I get stagnant even though I'm maybe more mature, but I'm stagnant, which actually equals immaturity because I'm not doing anything with the knowledge that I have.
Right.
And so then you watch maybe a new believer who is just so hungry for like being transformed and like God's word and acts of service and knowing their gifts, and they're like, wow, they're on a like fast track to becoming a mature believer, but I don't want it to get them to be a mature believer that knows too much that they don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
And so I've watched that time and time again where mature believers end up in stagnation because they're not doing anything with what they know.
And they want to do something, you know? I mean, they want to explore, you know, and when they first become a Christian, you have all this super faith, you know, it's like the honeymoon period. So that's a time where you really want to send them out there, you know, to YWAM or, you know, working with the homeless or exploring, you know, who they are. There's another thing that I noticed in the Bible. If you ever want to do an interesting Bible study, and speaking of Bible studies, before I go there, you know, how many Bible studies have people been to, you know? Thousands, you know, it seems like. But when people went to a Bible study, if they had to apply what they studied this week with accountability and support, they put me out of business. Because it's all in there. You see what I mean? Okay. So there's that thing in the Bible, what I call the fifth gospel. And if you want to do an interesting Bible study, just go and read the parables of Jesus, right? Because they're a hidden message. He says, those who have ear to hear, let them hear what the Spirit is saying. And the vast majority of those parables all have exactly the same theme. That if you have my Spirit in me, you're going to bear fruit. And think of the parables that have to do with bearing fruit. The vineyard, the goats and the sheep, that's the gnarliest one, right? Okay. And then there's, you know, the seed that fell by the side of the road, you know, the wheat and the tares. There's the same message all the way through there. And, you know, it's a pretty scary message because each one of them, you know, has the result that if you don't bear fruit, there's some pretty heavy consequences to it. You know, it's not just, you know, that you're gonna grow. And so Jesus is telling us, you know, that if you have my Spirit in you, you're going to bear fruit. And one of the things I've noticed in, you know, 40 years, we were missionaries and doing all sorts of, you know, pioneering all sorts of ministries, is it's in Luke 4, where Jesus says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. And he has anointed me to what? Set the captives free, bind up the brokenhearted, open the eyes of the blind, which is, I believe, spiritually blind, preach the gospel to the poor, and in the favorable year of the Lord, which is to give people hope. Okay? So what I have seen is where the Spirit of God is, at least one of those things is going to be happening. And that's one reason I really like working with a rescue mission, because it's one of the only places where all five of them are happening. You see? And that's kind of an amazing place to be. If we became stagnant, okay, how do you think God, what kind of message do you think he would give us to break us free of being stagnant? Okay? And it's usually pain. Unfortunately, as human beings, it's pain that motivates us to change. Okay? And that's one of the things I always say do. You know, some of these messages I give, you know, I got one on the fear of God and some of these ones, and pastors say, no, I don't want to do that because it might make people uncomfortable. You see what I mean? But change begins from being made uncomfortable. So your goal of your messages should be to make people uncomfortable. Okay? Some of them may leave, but other ones who want to change, you know, will be challenged and on fire for it. Okay? So pain is a message or even a gift from God to show us when something is wrong, so we'll respond to it. Okay? And if we don't respond to it, we anesthetize it, then we lose the message. But even all our emotions, you know, have a message. Say loneliness. Loneliness is one of the emotions that we most avoid. See? It's a painful emotion. And many people will go to any lengths to not feel it. And why? It's because loneliness is a message from God to tell me I need something. And what does loneliness tell me I need?
Yeah, I think we need God, but we need God in people form as well. We need community.
Right. Well, we need relationships. But there's only one kind of relationship. You can be in a church with 10,000 people and still be lonely, right? It's a particular type of relationship that fills, you know, what we talked about before, the empty place, okay? That God designed for relationships. Remember what I said too, that all addictions do the same thing. They temporarily anesthetize the awareness of the empty place. But the empty place is our need for relationships, but in our limbic system, what do I have under trusting relationships? Good things or bad things? Usually bad things, so we avoid the thing we need the most. Okay? And so,
Hey, Michael.
let me finish the thought or I won't get it. Okay? So loneliness says I need intimacy, but limbically, that's where I'm most vulnerable and I can most be hurt. Right? So that's what we call one of these double bind kind of things, lose-lose situation where I'm stuck. If I remain lonely, I'm screwed. And if I, reach out to others, I'm screwed. So I try to anesthetize the awareness. So all our emotions, including shame and anger, rage, they all have a message in them. And if we anesthetize them, we'll never hear the message. And sometimes we need a safe group, which is what we try to do with the living thing, where you can experience this and have others help you hear what the message is and respond to it. What do you think your life's going to be like? But on our own, we can't hear these messages because they're limbic and they're subconscious. And that's why we say the safe atmosphere that is an atmosphere where our heart will begin to reveal its secrets. And those secrets are where, change and, our ultimate quality of our life is.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, I know some of my friends who are kind of trying to figure out who God is and have had some negative experiences in the past. This might be the one thing that they'd be like, yes, I agree with that. Of course, God is trying to give me pain because that's all I've experienced from him is the things that he didn't do. And I feel like God has always been this kid who's trying to burn me, burning the ant with the magnifying glass. That's what he's done to me in my life. So what would you say to someone who's wrestling with that? It's well, of course God is causing pain in my life. That's all I've really experienced from him. How would you resonate that with?
Well, the bummer of it is when we pray, okay, how does God answer those prayers? 99% of the time through people. So if we don't trust people because of betrayal, we push away the answers to our own prayers, you see? And so, it's really difficult. And I can't emphasize this enough of how totally subconscious all this stuff is. You see? But they're bringing light into the darkness of these wounds, okay, that really does set us free. So.
Yeah, I've known, I may have said this, I'm not sure, before, but something I've seen and felt and probably even done is I think sometimes when I'm sitting with somebody, you're letting me know some pain that you're in, or we're sitting together, and I try to do everything that I can as a Christian to help you not feel that pain or avoid that pain. And it may be the very thing that God has you in to wake you up.
Of course.
And I'm trying to help you avoid it, well-meaning.
Yep.
But I have you seen that play out a bunch, or maybe it's just me, I'm a bad person.
And we'll get to that when we talk about codependency, see? Because in our whole society, especially with the medical system, pain is a bad thing. For example, you might go to the doctor, you're depressed and you're anxious, and so he doesn't care about why you're depressed and anxious. He just gives you some medicine, so you don't feel it anymore. But when I work with doctors, I say, do their emotions match their circumstances? Yeah, they just got divorced and their dog got run over and they're living alone and their job is insecure. So of course they're going to have some anxiety and depression, see? And those things, those very emotions will motivate them to do something about it. But if you take away the emotions, especially that go with their circumstances, you see, then you take away their motivation to change and people just stay stuck for years. And that's why, we're 4.5%, I talked to you, of the world's population. We use 80% of the world's painkillers, They just don't get it. So, okay, let's move on, okay? Oops, I got this PowerPoint's messing with it, okay? So what do you think God would use if we became spiritually stagnant, just like our own Father might do, especially at the age around puberty when he sees we have all these giftings and everything, and we're just playing video games and we're stuck, and we're just not, just alone and isolated. You see, our fathers would do something, wouldn't they, to try and wake us up, to get us to show what a great athlete we are, or an engineer, or whatever these talents that he's seen in us. Okay, so C.S. Lewis says that pain is God's megaphone to a deaf world. And I really like that. Okay, so what kind of things do you think he might use to get this message, to break us free, to motivate us to change? Okay. Well, here's some of them, and you have this handout, okay, that you downloaded, hopefully before you got to this session, okay? And it's a little questionnaire. And see, so these are some of the symptoms of stagnation that I found that in these groups I did that were prevalent, and most all of them, believe it or not, went away. You know what the number one treatment, the most effective treatment for depression is? Altruism, volunteering, giving. You see, it's more powerful than Prozac and all that stuff combined. That and exercise are the two things that really help depression. So depression, anger, feeling lost, without direction, confused. How many people know that? They have no ambition in life. They have no goals. Right? They're confused. Okay? Procrastinating all the time. You see? Because what is procrastination? It's about trying to avoid something I don't want to do. And anxiety, hopelessness, despair, self-pity. You hear that a lot with people who are spiritually stagnant. Oh, I'm just stuck, and I'm in this place, and nobody cares. Okay, and the other one is blaming. I know a friend whose wife is very, very disappointed in her life, right? And she's always blaming. Well, I had the kids, and so I had to be a mother, and I lost my career, and if you were a better husband, you see what I mean? This dissatisfaction, I don't want to blame myself, so I want to blame it on circumstances or people. See? So that's one of the real signs of this spiritual stagnation. Okay, religiosity. Okay, we'll get to that. Can I talk about that now or not? Nah. No. Anyway, being super religious. Okay, overwork, being a workaholic, we call it running from the bear, just speeding up so I don't have to feel these feelings, okay? All or nothing thinking, being critical, irritable, being judgmental, and all kinds of addictions. Okay? Because, I'll tell you a quick story about this guy. I don't know, maybe it was about a year before I had my first encounter of salvation with Jesus anyway. I had a couple before that. I didn't know who he was then, okay? And I was at the San Francisco Zoo, and I was walking by, and I heard this little voice. I walked by this tiger's cage, and he was just kind of pacing back and forth, they do, right? And this little voice came in my head and said, Michael, you're like that tiger. Okay, and so I went back and looked at the little plaque, and that tiger had been born in the zoo, right? So I looked at him and just his eyes and just pacing back and forth. And I realized I was just like him. I didn't know what I was supposed to be, but I knew this wasn't it. Because he'd never been in the jungle. He didn't know what he was missing. But, I really identified, and it started me on a new search to try and find out, what I had to contribute in life, and, what would get me excited, what I'd be willing to make sacrifices for.
I know this is not new information, but there's so much to talk about in all of that.
Oh yeah, but my favorite is the concept of spiritual constipation.
Yes, that is the best one by far.
That's so great.
Put words to something that I've felt.
You can't keep taking
before.
it in without getting it out. It's going to be painful.
Hey,
that's
biology and spirituality, they're just not that far off from each other.
Your problem is that you're stopped up
I love it.
I'm gonna say a lot of inappropriate things.
Yeah,
so keep
well,
track.
but the point is though, like it's interesting because it's not something that you would relate. Like it's obvious, right? You can't. Well, the biology part is obvious, but you think about spirituality and you're like, well, that can't be a thing, right? Like more and more, God is infinite, wants to give me all of this stuff like that. I should be able to handle more love, right? I should be able to handle more good things from Him, and it's just so interesting because it's like, well, yeah, but that's not how I made you. I made you to get stuff out of you.
Right.
And it's just, it really shakes you a little bit to go, but when you think of it in terms of, a baby to an adult, like then it starts to make a lot of sense. I'm fully dependent on other people and on God in the beginning. And then it slowly changes. So like parents done a good job when a kid is perfectly self-reliant. Obviously we're never self-reliant, but I'm doing something for the world and I'm giving out. Like that's the best kind of adulthood anyway.
Well, and really, when I've experienced, I think I'm assuming this topic is something that all of us have experienced at one point in our faith journey, if we're not experiencing it currently. And one of the things that he said in one of his books, and I don't know that he really unpacked it as much in this session, was that that fear keeps us stagnant. That you have to take risks to grow, that faith in action breaks the power of spiritual stagnation.
Yep.
So when I think about the moments or seasons of my life where it's been the opposite of stagnation, where I felt aware of God's presence and my intimacy with God is increasing and my behavior, the things I'm doing are exemplifying the fruit of the Spirit, it usually has been directly correlated to risk, my faith in action. And it can range from like a risk of trusting myself with others, being vulnerable in a relationship or in a conversation, to like moving to California to plant a church. Like it can range in all of those different things. But there is an element of like, if I'm learning, I guess, when I'm feeling stuck, like a good question to ask might be, how or where can I take a risk today?
Right.
In
A
my
kingdom
faith?
risk. Yeah.
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 I think that's huge, especially knowing that pain is this message and this gift from God. And it's not always, I think, that I'm actively avoiding pain because it's lurking out there and I know it is. And I'm really trying to stay away from it and just try to stay comfortable. And that's probably another thing that we all do as well. But sometimes it's like, I might have to move toward my pain, even if I feel like it's not a big deal, or like just make myself uncomfortable. Like, yeah, I have too much stuff. Maybe I should get rid of some stuff. Like I've seen that in my own life with stuff. That's not a prescription. Not everybody should just get rid of all their stuff. But there's something to like the comfort of our lives, physically, spiritually, relationally. It doesn't do that many good things for us, which is interesting. It's a terrible paradise to chase after because that's not where we grow. We grow when we have pain, and I think that includes other people's pain too. Like if I want to move toward risk, I'm gonna bring somebody else's pain into my life. That's dangerous for somebody that's trying to stay stable and comfortable.
Right.
Why would I bring in you're bringing me down, man? Like, get near me. But it's just like pain is where the growth happens.
Yeah.
So.
One of the other things he mentioned that I thought was just, he throws these little nuggets in. And I'm
Like
just
it's nothing.
He didn't even unpack that.
He just does that. Yeah.
He said with therapy, one of the things that uncovers that people had insights but no real change unless they had support and accountability.
Right.
Again, we talk about the support and accountability over and over again. But when he said that, I was like, oh, wait a minute. Yes, I've had several seasons of my life where I gain insight, but there's no real change because nobody else but me knows the insight that I just gained.
I'm not on the hook, actually.
So I have no accountability.
Right.
I have hope, meaning like in that moment that maybe it'll be different, maybe it'll change, but I haven't risked the vulnerability to tell someone, hey, this is something that's going on in my life, or this is something I need to change, which then means there's no accountability. It's just it was an interesting loop for me. I was like, oh, yeah.
Yep.
That's why I've gotten stuck sometimes, because it's an insight.
Well, and I think even it's not even that way with just a therapist. It's that way with God. Like God reveals something important to me, uncovers something inside me, outside of me, new level of understanding, faith, whatever it is. I don't think God has ever looked at a person and said, I'm going to give this to you and I want you to keep it a secret. Like I just don't think that's ever happened, because it has to be like, you got to take it. It's going to be good for somebody else. And it being good for somebody else and you sharing that is going to be good for you. Yeah. And it really, if God's asking you to keep it a secret, he's probably not. that might not be happening.
Yeah,
It might be
it may
too
not have
much of
been-
a statement,
may not
but
have been from God.
yeah, like that might be what I wish God would say.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's yeah, challenging. And then the whole cultural lie of the pain is a bad thing. I think that's an entire rabbit trail we could wander down forever.
Yeah.
'Cause it's just so interesting how embedded it is in everything that we do, which is funny because we're also the first culture in human history to not deal with like a catastrophe of suffering every day of our lives. Like,
Some would say that's COVID right now, though.
well, that's a good point. That is very
We're in
true.
it right now,
That
Tommy.
is very true. But it's just fascinating how quickly we got used to as a culture.
Yep.
Like I could be comfortable all the time.
Yeah.
There was one more thing that he said too that I just loved.
Oh, he said lots
I don't
of
know
things.
what it
Don't wait
was.
for it to come back. Let's keep
I know
rolling.
it's
There's
too
more
much.
content.
It's too much. All right, so we've got this idea of spiritual stagnation. We give to grow. That is a principle that we need to move on, and not just stay changed, but like keep changing and keep growing. And we have to move toward our pain for that. And now we are going to move toward something else that unlocks new levels of growth because of some of the specific wounds and where we get tripped up in the first place. This is Michael talking about being wounded in our giftedness. Here we go.
So the next thing that can prevent us from living out of the life that God created us to live is that we become wounded in our giftedness. And this is very, very common. And you think if there is a devil whose job is to hinder the kingdom of God, one of the things that he could do is wound us in our giftedness, which is our true identity at a very young age. And then those wounds, I could be most wounded in who I really am, see? And then I would never, express that because it's too painful. I want to give you a quick story. I was working with a guy years ago, and he was a mechanic, and he came to me because he started to have suicidal ideation, right? And he was addicted to pornography, he was addicted to gaming, he was addicted to weed, some alcohol, and caffeine. I mean, a lot of addictions. And he was very depressed and very suicidal. So we did some memory work, and it came back to a memory, okay? That when he was about 6 or 7 years old, he and his brother drew a picture of a train, right? And took it to their dad, who was also a mechanic and an alcoholic, right? And he looked at these pictures and he threw them down and he said, drawing pictures is for sissies and queers, is exactly what he said, And so, the one brother, the older brother, he was a football player, it didn't bother him. But John was an artist and he never drew another picture. Okay? And when he went to school, when they had art, he would act out and be rebellious and do all this stuff, right? So he got labeled as a rebellious troublemaker and carried him all right through school, right? And then he became a mechanic like his dad, right? And he had no idea of this memory or this talent in him because it was buried so deep because it was such, a strong wound, Just like you, wearing glasses, big deal, But there's something of your vulnerability at that time that created a wound that's still affecting you today. So anyway, we looked at this thing and we started having John, make some things. He went back to school and he went to art classes and he was just amazing. Everything he touched became a piece of art, right? And he ended up getting, his degree and everything in it and started teaching it. He went into juvenile hall, was teaching, art for there, and all his addictions just faded away. And he was actually now able to get married and have kids. But you see, he had no idea, see? But once he started living out of his true self, okay? And remember we talked about that before. When you have a life of meaning, value, and purpose, your chances of being self-destructive are almost nil. But if you don't have a life of meaning or value and you don't know your purpose, how are you going to cope with that? The emptiness of that. And so, I want to say this at this point too. I'm a what works guy, right? Because the people I work with, we don't find something that works, they're going to die. It's life and death, these addictions, Not only in them, but everybody around them. And you know what works? is being born again. That's the bottom line. I mean, in my own story, just I'd never been in church. I never read the Bible, right? Well, actually, I was in a church once. I got married in a church once, but I was on acid, so it probably didn't count, right? And so, but I was like in a coma. I look back on it. I had no ambition. I had no goals. I had no talents. I was just being a carpenter, smoking dope, and going surfing, and just kind of like in a fog. And that night, laying in my bed, when I prayed that silly little prayer, well, if you're real, then something hit me, and the next day I was a different person. I began to have burdens for other people. I mean, never in my wildest dreams that I'd be an author and a speaker. I can't spell and I can't type, so it just, and people that knew me, earlier could never believe I'd become a Christian. I was voted in high school the least likely to see the age of 21. That's how just, doing wild things, trying to get my identity and all. But, and my son's like this now too. I mean, he just, he won't mind me sharing this, but he was like in a fog. And, about 6 months ago, and I prayed for him for years, okay, that he had this true born again experience, and he's just finding all these talents, and he's like gardening, and he's going back to school, and he just like woke up, right? So this experience that God gives us of, which is really like being born again, right? Into our true selves, having this Spirit in me, giving me direction and helping me explore a lot of things my real father should have done if he was there, and it just, I all of a sudden had this burden, and that's one of the main things you see where the Spirit of God is rather than religion, is that we start to become other-centered rather than self-centered. And like I say, religion in and of itself, and I practice most all of them, is self-centered. See? It's all about me and my involvement and my knowledge and all that, but relationship, is other-centered. See? Okay. And we'll talk a little bit more when we get to secrets. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've just watched so many people and even me before, like, play the game of church, of like, I come in, I do my time, I maybe serve a little bit, I maybe like give some mental assent to it, I maybe even give a little bit, I maybe even get involved, and maybe even in a group. But I really haven't been transformed from the inside out, because it's been like a religious duties that I'm performing, thinking that I'm going to get a good score from God on the test because I'm doing the religious duties. But being born again is the relationship from the inside out, that you become a new person, and that changes everything, like you just said. So
it's like Ephesians, right? He says, we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for right, good works that he prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. So, finding myself is actually losing myself. There's so many things about, about that transformation that we have to give to grow. And as long as I'm self-centered, see, that's just natural, for religion, see. But, see, religion is a one-way communication with God. See? And we'll talk about that, I'm going to preview there, okay? But relationship is two-way communication. Yeah, when we don't have things in our lives that prevent us from having two-way communication, we'll talk about that again when we get secrets, okay? That we have to get our self-worth from acts of self-righteousness, okay? Should we keep going?
Well, so even like white knuckling, like trying to, like, I've got these stuff, and so I'm going to white knuckle my way through it and not rely on the being transformed from the inside out, is a powerless way to go about change.
What's the difference between sobriety and recovery? Right. Recovery is returning to a far more healthy state. But on a life that's born again, I can build a a life of recovery. Mhm. It's a whole different kind of thing. And when I work with prisoners, okay, you know, and some of them, were gnarly guys. One guy was a Buddhist skinhead who was the enforcer for the Aryan Brotherhood in San Quentin. I mean, I'll tell you his story sometime, but tough guy, right? And but what they say, if they have this born again experience, they go, something happened. I just don't want to do it anymore. And it's common. I just didn't want to do it anymore. I was a chronic thief when I got, because it's a rush, stealing stuff, right? And then I just didn't want to do it anymore. My focus wasn't on that anymore. I had a whole new momentum and direction in my life. So this is, I want to say that because, we get into psychology and all these things and all, but it's all towards, and of course, when I became born again, I still had a lot of baggage. I wasn't a new creature in Christ, and everything fell away. Actually, when I became born again, the battle began. Between the angel and demon in my head. We have an exercise in one of the books called Red Dog, Blue Dog, which does that. We talk about which dog is speaking to you, which dog you're feeding. And but just like Paul, look at the life of Paul. He was doing good till the road to Damascus, and look what happened to him after that. So there's a price with serving God, but when the Spirit of God is in, we're willing to pay it. See? And that's what, I'll just share this real quick, Ken. When I first got saved, I had a lot of addictions and things that I was working with, right? And I couldn't get over them, especially tobacco. I started smoking when I was 6 years old, so it was really ingrained. I got saved when I was like 32, okay? And I was walking into one of the ministries we started, and I was trying to not smell like a ashtray because it wasn't cool as a Christian, and weed and all sorts of stuff, right? And he said, Michael, I can't use you this way. He said, Michael, I can't help. I'm going to help you to set people free, but you have to have freedom yourself. And this is what changed me, and maybe it'll help you, okay? What motivated me to be able to get over this stuff, he said, Michael, are you willing to give this stuff up for people you haven't met yet? And, that was a moment in my life, and I was, see? And I wasn't able to get free of the stuff for myself and ask the Spirit of God, but I was willing to give up this stuff for people I hadn't met yet, you see? So let's look at this one. And working especially with missionaries, I've taught in a lot of missionary schools and, addictive behavior and all that. It says, you will probably never make peace with your past until your pain becomes somebody else's gain. So many people are stuck and they're angry at God because why did God allow all the bad stuff to happen to me in my life, And they can't move forward until they understand why God didn't protect them and, all this kind of stuff. But when your struggle and your pain becomes your ministry, which is what God does, if we have the right discipleship program to help us be able to do it, right? It's when your struggle and your pain turns into your ministry and you see other people, get healed, from you, and you say, yeah, I see where you're at, and I was there too, and follow me, I know how to walk out of this because I've done it myself, see? At that moment, I've seen so many of these stuck people, make peace of their past and saying, yeah, I'm sorry all that stuff happened to me, but now, maybe it's all worth it because I'm seeing my pain become somebody else's gain. So this is important, for churches, okay, to be able to see people. AA is that way, right? That's, it's alcoholics helping other alcoholics is why it's so successful, is to be able to identify people's struggles and then get them into a group or some counseling or some kind of way where they can have knowledge, education, experience to be able to take that struggle and make it their ministry. Wow. I mean, we could change the world if we did that, wouldn't we? Yeah. Okay. So even like anxiety, someone who's really got a handle on anxiety and got some freedom from it, like Ruth, how many people you know, especially women, that are struggling with anxiety? Okay? But I have the answer. You have the answer because you've done it yourself. Okay. And that's really the goal of the change groups. Is to create these processes. Spiritual stagnation is the first process in the change group. Okay, and so is to make relationships that would last. Okay? The people know your strengths and your weaknesses, and they discourage you in your weaknesses and encourage you in your strengths with, hear it again, with accountability and support. And that makes us able to change where we couldn't do it on our own. Okay?
You were right. He did talk more about accountability and support. It's like literally the thing he keeps talking about. Because if you ask him too, he's like, yeah, that's the only thing that really works. Like,
Yeah.
it's all about that. Like, all the information's good, but if you don't have the people with the accountability and support, you're not gonna do it.
Right. And those two, I think, the two words are necessary. I think we've probably all experienced accountability on its own, where it's like,
Yeah.
that was wounding, not helpful.
Performance reports.
And then we've
Yeah,
experienced
on my-
support,
yeah.
which feels like enabling sometimes. So those two things, I know he kind of just throws them together quickly, but they really are things that hold the tension needed to experience
There's
change.
a lot there. Yeah. Which is hard, which also means I have to know what I bring to the table to give somebody else accountability and support. It's not just like, oh, just be a good friend. Like, what does that mean?
Well, I think he's
'Cause there's
kind
a lot
of,
there.
he hasn't
Yeah.
said it, but I think when I think about good accountability, it's what he said in multiple topics where he's like, you just ask questions.
Yeah.
You just ask good
Best
questions.
filter ever. Yeah.
Some of my friends that have held me accountable, the question they've asked, it's been the most helpful and eye-opening is just simply, what are you going to do about that?
Yeah.
I mean, and it just puts it back in my lap.
Seriously.
Like, well, I mean, now that you framed it that way, I guess I have to do something about it.
I guess I
but-
should. You're right. I hadn't thought of that.
Yep. And then the next time we meet, it's like,
Yeah.
so what did you do about it?
Yeah, it's pretty easy actually.
And if I didn't do anything about it, we didn't meet. It's like, I'm busy.
Okay,
Sorry.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, well, and I love what he does here too. Like we talk so much in those first 4 sessions, even about the past, what's happened to us, what's broken, and I think pulling up above all of that for this to see the picture at the end, even if I'm not there, even if I'm still stuck in the mess, to know no, where I'm going is turning all of this pain into someone else's gain. That's
Right.
That's exciting. That's not just like, oh, I'll leave it behind and be comfortable and happy. It's like, no, I'll have a life of meaning and impact,
Right.
which I didn't think was possible maybe. But now I see that because of my pain, I can do that for somebody. I think that's huge, like moving from what feels self-centered, even fixing me, to other-centered. All of it's so huge. And so I love getting to pull up above the mess and the chaos that I might feel to see that picture of the future. I think it's super helpful, and I'm glad he went there. in
Yeah.
this session.
Well, and to wrap things up, he's going to go to a place I think that dovetails into this a little bit, right? With like how what prevents us even from doing that is, hey, sometimes our wounds
Right.
aren't healed, and so how do we use our pain
Right.
if it's still fresh, right?
Yes. And so, that's where we're going next, talking about emotional wounds and the dreaded word secrets, which is the perfect way to end. So here we go.
Emotional wounds are like physical wounds. They make us hypervigilant. Okay? So say you hurt your arm, you got a big hematoma on your arm. It's really sore. You can't really touch it. It hurts, right? And you go to church. What's your experience going to be like there? Yeah? Well, you're going to be hypervigilant because you have a wound there, right? And so you're kind of always watching around. Nobody's going to come up and say, hi, Mike. And then you're talking to somebody else, and somebody else goes, hey, hi, Mike. And you go, ah! What's your reaction towards them? Anger. You see what I mean? And so that kind of pain gives us anger. Well, emotional wounds are the same way. We're always hypervigilant that anybody's going to come up and poke that wound. Right? In some places in Genesis, we call it somebody's going to push your button. And so when somebody overreacts, we have a way of using that for healing. Called a road to the wound. But when somebody pushes your button, instead of you have a couple choices. You can keep people at distance so they can't get close enough to push your button, right? Or you can name the button and what it is and where it's there and get it removed. Big difference. But you have to have the knowledge and expertise to be able to do that. And so that's the first thing we say. Somebody, oh, the guy really pushed your button, didn't he? Oh yeah. Well, whose button is it? See, just ask questions. Questions are so much more powerful than answers. And what button did they push? And then people just go. They never thought about it. Okay? So emotional wounds, like physical wounds, make us protective and hypervigilant in our lives, that nobody can get close. And this is what happens in a lot of marriages, is when you first get married, that's the first person you let get close enough to push your buttons. They didn't push your buttons. They didn't put the buttons there, but they push them. And so how do you react to them? See? You get angry and don't do that, don't do that. See what I mean? See? So it's all an opportunity. Everything's an opportunity to heal, no matter what happens. Okay? So let's look at the power of secrets. Okay? Secrets are one of the things that prevents us from living out of our true self and totally isolates us. Okay? So in AA they say we're only as sick as the secrets we keep. And then, of course, David says, when I kept silent, my bones became brittle from my groanings all day long. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My strength was drained as in a summer heat. So what we're saying is our secrets affect us physically. They poison our system. They poison our bodies and our minds. And why is a secret a secret?
It's shameful, something we're embarrassed about.
Yeah, because you're doing something you shouldn't be doing. And you don't want anybody to know about it. And you don't want to give it up. So let's look at secrets. The main feature of secrets, remember I said the main strategy to keep us, self-destructive is isolation. Okay? So secrets isolate us from ourselves. Because I'm doing these shameful things, and especially like this with sex addiction and pornography, you see this so rampant, right? Is it isolates me from myself because there's stuff in myself that I don't want to deal with. I don't look. See, and this is important, okay? Because that's what addictions do. They push back, okay? Three things. They push back unwanted thoughts, feelings, and memories out of our awareness. That's what all addictions do. Things I don't want to think about, things I don't want to feel, and things I don't remember. See? And so secrets really do that. And also isolate us from God. And the way they isolate us from God, because if you have a relationship with Jesus and you go up in the morning to pray, what's the first thing he's going to talk to you about? Your secrets. Why? Because he loves you. Just like your own good father would, and because he knows you're doing something that's not good for you. So he wants to what? Create pain, which bring it into your awareness, shame and guilt and, all these kinds of things. It's called conviction, okay? Conviction always comes from love, right? Condemnation comes from people. The same message, but different source, right? Okay? And so he's going to want to talk. So if we don't want to give it up, what do we have to do? See? We have to block his voice. And that's what we talked about a little while earlier, is it creates religiosity. Because you don't want to hear his voice, because this is what he wants to talk to you about, then you have one-way communication with God. You get rid of your secrets, and you begin to have a clean conscience, and you begin to have two-way communication with God. Okay? And of course from others, the people that are closest to us, they want to keep them away because they'll sense it. You see, they'll sense our secrets. Okay? And that's one of the biggest results and rewards of getting free of your secrets and getting into recovery. Because when human beings are functioning as God designed them to, we have this thing called empathy, which we're able to feel what other people are feeling. See? So I will sense your secrets, you see, and say, hey, how you doing? I'm just fine. No, man, how you doing? You know, you don't look fine. Oh, I'm cool, you know. But you see what I mean? And that's one of the things of getting into recovery. We get the log out of our eye so we can see the speck in somebody else's eye. So that's one of the main features of people who get into recovery is they begin to function as a human being again and being able to have this thing called empathy, which is feeling what other people feel. See? And you can't do that when you have secrets. Okay? And of course, it also separates us from our ministry, and this is devastating because say you're into porn addiction, right? Okay? Or any kind of addiction, and it's your secret. Well, as long as you just sit in the pew, the consequences of getting found out are not too devastating. But if you're in ministry and your secrets come out, it's much more devastating. See, much more shame, a lot more people know, a lot more people disappointed. See? So it also, diminishes our ability to serve God. And this is just, we have a chapter, and I have actually a YouTube video from that chapter on secrets. And hopefully by this time, I think it's, process 6 or something, that we'd have a safe enough group to be able to unpack some of this stuff and experience some freedom.
Well, there you go.
That last 7 minutes was gold,
It was
man.
packed.
I mean, all of it's always great, but I'm not joking. Like, that's probably worth a listen again. The conversation around our emotional wounds and the hypervigilance, and man, the secrets. Like, that's. It was only 5 minutes, but that's the most concise 5 minutes, I think.
When it's intense too. Just the fact, like, I know that a secret isolates me from somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. It does. Well, I guess that you gotta buy into that too. Like, oh, it's okay. Well, they don't need to know me. Well, like, well, then you'll never know me.
Yeah.
I am my secrets, but also that isolates me from God. Like, that takes a while to stew on, because it's like, well, God's gonna go to the thing that hurts me the most. And what hurts me the most? The thing that I'm keeping a secret. And so if he's like, well, I'm sitting over here waiting for you to deal with this, and I'm like, well, I'm not. We're in different places.
Mm-hmm.
Just that idea was like, I can't even probably fathom how many people have either said to me or expressed to me or asked me, or that I've felt at different times, like, I don't feel like I can hear the voice of God. What does that mean? And it's really interesting because, like, one of the things to figure out when you're asking that question is probably like, well, how many secrets do I have?
Well,
That's
and
interesting.
I
That's
mean,
a lot.
Of course, everything he's been teaching is lined up with Scripture, which is great since we're a church.
It's probably important, yeah.
But it's been the Scripture of, like, confess your sins to one another so that you may be healed.
Yeah.
Like, that's something that's so core to this, and just keeps coming to the top of my mind because I really wanted to read that Scripture as, like, confess your sins to God so that you could be healed.
Right.
Like, because I don't want to tell other people. But confessing your sins to God leads to forgiveness, but healing comes from this relationship with other people, and I love the handles that he's given all of this. So, I would just encourage all of us to, like, really double down and lean in during the week, because you're going to be sending out some great resources this week.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about what's coming?
They're actually even all ready. So all the stuff on session 5 on missionmentor.com/change workshop, the extra stuff's already there. You got 2 bonus things. So you've got the Q&A that Michael and I did. We hit like 8 or 9 different topics and questions, just super quality stuff. The interviewer was especially probably the best part, but Michael was good too.
Did Lauren do the interview?
She was wonderful.
Oh, okay.
She was feeding me lines in the anyway. So where was I? So the Q&A's there, and that's over an hour, bunch of good stuff, and you can jump around. We put a bunch of timestamps in there. They're all ready for you, so you can go to specific questions. Also, we've got that 10 minutes on anxiety. If you struggle with anxiety regularly, if you know anybody, like, just really helpful to have more context and perspective on the anxiety conversation. It is so, especially with COVID, especially with elections, especially with all the things going on, like, anxiety seems to run rampant through our society. And hopefully it's another helpful 10 minutes. So those two are there. And that spiritual stagnation, instead of just looking at the symptoms on the slide and going, sure, all those, like, really drilling down. It's a really helpful and simple worksheet that's already up there. You can download the PDF or just check out the image and go through that worksheet for yourself. That's some really good reflection time.
Yeah.
And then, as always, we got questions for reflection and journaling, and then also some ways to kind of start a conversation related to this topic. So, bunch of stuff. Keep leaning in throughout the week, and it doesn't have to be this week. You could keep doing stuff as we go, even
Right.
after it's over.
Yep.
Let us know if you're interested in a change group when we launch them. Again, like we said, it'll probably be January, but let us know now. We're trying to get ready with the right amount of facilitators and everything, and that really matters that we know how many people we are hoping to get in them. So fill that out. You got your bonus material. If you didn't hear it in the beginning, we are going an extra glorious week. We could not fit it all in, so we got a session 7. Next week is session 6. We're talking about codependency and hope, and then we'll finish off with session 7, grieving and forgiveness.
It's gonna be so good.
Bunch of great stuff left, and that's all I got. Is that all you got?
That's it.
See you next time.